My husband, Leo, begged me not to attend his law school graduation. When I asked him why, he sneered, "I don't want people finding out you're just a waitress." Then with a chilling finality, he said, "I'll just tell them you're dead. Don't ever contact me again." I left in tears. Years later, on the day he was set to marry someone else, my phone began to ring incessantly. It was his mother, his bride, everyone, demanding to know what was happening. "You can't come to my graduation. I don't want people knowing you're just a waitress." Leo dropped this bombshell just 2 weeks before the ceremony I had been eagerly anticipating for months. I'd already put in for the day off at the Cornerstone Cafe. I'd already chosen my best dress, a simple navy number I'd found at a consignment shop but had specially dry cleaned for the day. I had already pictured myself in that crowd, my heart swelling with pride as my husband walked across the stage to accept the law degree I'd helped fund with countless dollars in tip money and so many extra shifts that my feet often bled. Before we go on, I just want to say thank you for being here to hear these stories of resilience and self-worth. If you believe that all honest work should be met with respect, no matter the job title, please think about subscribing. Your support allows us to bring more stories like this to light. Now let's see how this unfolds. But he didn't want me there. It wasn't because of a lack of seats. It wasn't because of a scheduling issue. It was because I was, in his words, just a waitress, and my existence was an embarrassment to him in front of his new peers, whose families were filled with judges, lawyers, and people who, in his eyes, truly mattered. Just a waitress. The phrase echoed in my mind, the words leaving a bitter, acidic taste in my mouth. "Is that all I am to you now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He finally glanced up from his phone, his face a cold, unfamiliar mask. There was no trace of the 4 years we'd been married, no memory of the 7 years I had dedicated to supporting his ambition, while my own dreams were tucked away in a shoebox under our bed. "Ava, be realistic," he said, his tone condescending. "Everyone there will come from money, from status. I can't have them meeting you and asking themselves why I married a woman who flips pancakes for a living." In that instant, I understood. The erasure of me had started long before he said the words. But to truly understand, I need to take you back to where it all began, to the place I spent the majority of my waking hours for 7 years, to the life I believed had meaning, before Leo reduced it to a source of shame he had to conceal. The Cornerstone Cafe is situated on the corner of Oak and 12th, the kind of establishment that carries a permanent aroma of sizzling bacon and coffee that's been on the warmer a little too long. The red leather booths are cracked, with strips of silver duct tape patching the worst of the tears. The jukebox in the corner is stuck in a time warp, playing an endless cycle of 80s rock ballads that either drives patrons mad or lulls them into a comfortable nostalgia. The linoleum tiles are worn down in spots, revealing the concrete skeleton of the building beneath. The old fluorescent lights tend to flicker whenever a storm rolls in, which in our city means they flicker for a good portion of the year. For 7 years, this cafe was my domain. I knew every nook and cranny, every mechanical quirk, every small moment of grace. I knew which booth had a wobbly leg that required a folded coaster to steady it. I knew which coffee carafe had a faster pour and which one would drip down the side if you weren't careful. I knew the ice machine would make a groaning sound for a solid 3 seconds before dispensing a cascade of cubes, and that the kitchen door wouldn't squeak if you gave it a firm push at just the right angle. But more than the building, I knew the people. I had memorized our regulars, their orders committed to heart before they even sat down. I knew their routines, their habits, the small human signatures of their lives. Mr. Henderson, a retired history teacher, came in every morning at 7:30 sharp for black coffee and a single slice of rye toast, dry. He always left a crisp $2 bill on the table, perfectly folded, and he always chose the booth by the front window where the morning sun allowed him to read his book without a glare. The law students from the nearby university used the Cornerstone as their unofficial study hall. They'd colonize the back booths for hours, nursing a single cup of coffee as their textbooks and laptops spread out like miniature empires. They argued over legal precedents and procedural ethics, their voices growing louder with each caffeine infusion, their hands gesturing wildly with pens and highlighters. They often stayed so late I had to clean around them as I prepped for closing. I moved through their world like a phantom, refilling water glasses and clearing away plates as they debated torts and appellate jurisdiction and the summer internships they coveted at top-tier firms. They never looked up when I came to their table. They never paused their intense discussions to offer a simple thank you. They never once learned my name, even though it was stitched onto the name tag pinned to my uniform every single day. To them, I was just part of the scenery, as fixed and as invisible as the worn-out tables and the flickering overhead lights. My co-workers, on the other hand, became my family in a way that often surprised me. Sophia had worked the morning shift for a decade and had a sixth sense for reading customers the second they walked in. She could predict who would be a generous tipper and who would make her run back and forth for pocket change. She could smell trouble before it even crossed the threshold, warning me about the customer who would complain about every dish or the one who looked like they were planning to dine and dash. She taught me how to navigate difficult patrons with a smile that was all business and a tone that was polite but carried an undercurrent of firm warning. Then there was Jake, who washed dishes on evenings and weekends to pay his way through community college. He was studying business and took night classes after his shifts. He had this whole philosophy he'd share while scrubbing pots in the back, his hands raw from the hot water and harsh soap. Every job teaches you something, he'd say. Washing dishes teaches you patience. It teaches you the satisfaction of bringing order from chaos. He believed that people who looked down on service work were the ones who'd never done it, who had no clue about the skill and endurance it truly takes. And there was Gus, the grill cook, who'd been at the Cornerstone for over 30 years. He came in at 5 a.m. to prep for the breakfast rush and didn't leave until the last dinner order was up. He was a man of few words, communicating mostly in grunts and nods, but he saw everything. If I came in with puffy eyes or was moving a bit slower than usual, he'd slide an extra slice of pie onto the counter for me during my break. No questions, no words, just a quiet understanding that sometimes kindness is best served in the form of a warm slice of apple pie and silence. The work itself was grueling, an exhaustion that settled deep into my bones. My feet throbbed every night, a deep ache that no amount of soaking in hot water could ever fully erase. Calluses formed on my heels, and my shoulders developed permanent indentations from carrying heavy trays stacked with plates and coffee pots. The smell of coffee seemed to cling to my hands no matter how hard I scrubbed them. I learned to plaster on a smile through blatant rudeness and condescension, to bite my tongue when customers would snap their fingers to get my attention, or call me honey in a tone that turned the word into an insult. But I found a profound dignity in that work, a value that the outside world often refused to see because it measured worth in degrees and salary figures instead of in reliability and honest-to-God effort. I was never late for a shift. I worked holidays and weekends without complaint. I learned every facet of the job until I could single-handedly run the front of the house if I had to. I took pride in doing it well, in ensuring coffee cups remained full, orders were accurate, and customers left happy, even if they never cared to know my name. It was at this very diner that I met Leo Vance 4 years ago. He wandered in late one Wednesday night during his first-year finals, looking utterly spent and penniless. He slumped into a back booth with a mountain of law textbooks and started counting out loose change, trying to figure out if he could afford both a coffee and something to eat. I watched him sort quarters from dimes, his shoulders hunched with that specific kind of tension that comes from doing math you wish you didn't have to. I brought him a coffee and a hot turkey sandwich. When he tried to pay, I told him it was a mistaken order and would just be thrown out if he didn't eat it. It was a lie, of course. I paid for it out of my own tip money. But there was something in his defeated posture that reminded me of my own younger brother's struggles, and I couldn't bear to watch someone study hungry. Leo looked up at me, his eyes filled with a gratitude that felt so genuine, and we struck up a conversation. He told me all about law school, the relentless pressure, the cutthroat competition, the gnawing fear that he wasn't smart or well-connected enough to succeed in a world dominated by legacy families. I told him about the diner, about the odd satisfaction of making someone's day just a little bit better with a good meal and a friendly face. We talked until my shift ended, and then he walked me all the way to my bus stop, even though it was in the opposite direction of his apartment. Within a month, we were dating. He'd visit the diner on my breaks, and we'd sit in that same back booth, sharing a coffee and talking about our hopes and fears. He had a way of making me laugh with his stories about his quirky professors and overly competitive classmates. He said I made him feel grounded, that I reminded him there was a real world outside the intense bubble of law school. 6 months later, we were married at the city courthouse with Sophia and Jake as our witnesses. We couldn't afford a proper wedding, not even a nice dinner afterward, but we didn't care. We were young and in love, convinced that our feelings were strong enough to conquer any practical hurdle. Those first few months of marriage felt like a true partnership. We lived in a tiny apartment above a 24-hour laundromat, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors' arguments through the paper-thin walls and could smell their cooking as if it were in your own kitchen. Our furniture was a hodgepodge of thrift store finds and items left on the curb. Our dishes were a mismatched collection. Our bed frame was held together by sheer optimism and a bit of duct tape. But it was ours, a life we were building from the ground up together. Leo would study late into the night while I soaked my aching feet after a double shift. We'd often fall asleep tangled together on our lumpy, second-hand couch, too exhausted to make it to the bedroom. We'd whisper about the future we were going to create once he graduated and launched his career. He spoke of opening his own firm one day, of defending those who couldn't afford a high-priced lawyer, of using his education to serve people, not just to get rich. I believed every word. I wanted to believe we were on the same page, that we both understood the value of working hard for something that mattered. I supported him in every way I could. When his student loan disbursement was late and our rent was due, I covered it with the money I'd been saving for new work shoes. I wore my old pair for another 6 months, even after the soles had worn so thin that my socks got soaked every time it rained. When Leo needed pricey textbooks and expensive bar prep courses, I picked up every extra shift I could get and went without buying new clothes for over a year. My winter coat had a zipper that was permanently broken, but his study materials always arrived on time. When he was consumed with stress over exams, I made sure our little apartment was a sanctuary of quiet. I took the evening shifts so he could have the days to study without any interruptions. I'd buy his favorite snacks and foods, even when our budget was tight, because I believed those small comforts were crucial during such a difficult time. I thought I was investing in us, in our shared future. I believed his success would be our success because we were a team. I see now just how wrong I was. But back then, I worked until my feet literally bled. There were nights I'd come home, peel off my socks, and find raw, open blisters that had burst during my shift, staining the inside of my shoes a faint pink. I'd clean them, bandage them, and then force my feet back into those same shoes the next morning because we couldn't afford for me to miss a single shift, and I certainly couldn't afford a new pair. The change in how Leo treated me was so gradual at first that I told myself I was imagining it. It started somewhere in his second year of law school, with small, subtle shifts that eventually accumulated into something much larger and more corrosive. He stopped introducing me as his wife at law school functions. We'd go to a study group party or a networking event, and when his classmates would ask who I was, he'd just say, "This is Ava," with no further context. At first, I figured he assumed everyone knew, but then I noticed how he'd quickly pivot the conversation away from me, steering it back to legal topics. When someone asked me what I did, Leo would interject before I could respond, making a vague comment about how boring day jobs were, immediately redirecting the focus back to himself and his studies. He stopped inviting me to his study groups at our apartment. He'd schedule them for the nights I was working my dinner shift, and when I suggested I could try to change my hours, he'd brush it off, saying it was fine and that I'd probably be bored listening to them discuss case law anyway. I went along with it because I desperately wanted to believe his excuses, because the alternative was too painful to face. When his classmates asked about his life outside of school, his answers became increasingly vague, slowly erasing me from his public narrative. I found this out by accident one evening when I swung by the law library to drop off a dinner he'd forgotten at home. I overheard him talking with a couple of classmates about their plans for the weekend, and one of them asked if he was doing anything with his girlfriend. "Nah," Leo said with a casual laugh. "I'll probably just hit the books. Don't really have time for a relationship with this course load." I stood frozen in the doorway, invisible, clutching his forgotten meal and listening to him pretend I didn't exist. When I confronted him about it later that night, he claimed I'd misunderstood. He said he just meant he didn't have time for the kind of relationship other people had, with regular date nights and weekend getaways. He insisted I should understand the immense pressure he was under and not overanalyze his every word. I let it go. I wanted peace more than I wanted the truth, but the erasure didn't stop. It intensified. Leo stopped posting any pictures of us together on his social media. His Instagram and Facebook pages became a carefully curated gallery of him at law school events or studying in trendy coffee shops, a portrait of a serious, dedicated student with no distractions. When I asked why he never posted photos of us anymore, he said social media was superficial and that he was trying to build a professional brand for potential employers. He stopped mentioning me in conversations with his professors or during networking events. I knew this because every so often one of his classmates would come into the Cornerstone, and when I'd mention I was Leo's wife, they'd look at me with genuine confusion, saying they had no idea he was even married. Each time it happened, another little piece of me cracked. I kept telling myself he was just stressed, that the pressure of law school was making him act this way, that everything would go back to normal once he graduated. I made excuses for behavior that was inexcusable, but deep down, a cold certainty was growing in my chest, a terrifying knowledge that I was becoming invisible within my own marriage, that my husband was systematically wiping me from his life while I was still standing right in front of him. And now, standing in our apartment with Leo's graduation ultimatum still ringing in my ears, I finally understood that the erasure was complete. I wasn't just being made invisible. According to Leo, I was no longer supposed to exist at all. The waitress who had supported him through 3 grueling years of law school, who had worked until her feet bled so he could focus on his studies, who had put her own dreams and financial security on hold for his education. That woman was now nothing more than an embarrassment to be hidden from the people who mattered. "Just a waitress," I whispered again, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. Leo stood up from the couch, slipping his phone into his pocket. "I'm glad you get it," he said coolly. "The ceremony is invitation only anyway, so it's not like you could have just shown up." That was a lie. I had seen the graduation flyer. Family was explicitly welcome, but I didn't argue. What was the point? He had already decided I wasn't family. He had already deemed me unworthy of being seen at his side on his day of triumph. "I need to get back to studying," Leo said, already walking toward our bedroom. He paused in the doorway, then looked back at me, his expression unreadable. "Oh, and Ava, I've been telling people you died a couple of years ago, so if anyone ever asks, just don't contact me. It's just cleaner this way." He shut the bedroom door behind him, leaving me alone in the living room. The Thursday night casserole I'd made was getting cold on the coffee table, and my entire world was collapsing around me like a building with a faulty foundation, finally giving in to the undeniable pull of gravity and truth. I stood frozen in our living room, staring at the closed bedroom door. The casserole on the coffee table had stopped steaming. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. Leo had just informed me that he had been telling people I was dead, and then he'd walked away to study as if he had just mentioned a minor change to his class schedule. My legs felt shaky, so I sank onto the couch where, just moments before, he had delivered his verdict. The fabric was worn smooth in the spots where we had spent 4 years sitting together, watching movies, eating takeout, pretending we were building a life. I pressed my palm against the cushion and felt nothing but old foam and springs that had long lost their tension. I had to understand. I needed him to explain how a person tells people their wife is dead while she is still cooking their meals and paying half the rent. I walked to the bedroom door and knocked, first softly, then with more force when he didn't answer. "Leo, we need to finish this conversation." "There's nothing to finish." His voice came through the door, muffled but clear. "I have a torts exam on Monday. I need to study." I opened the door anyway. He was sitting at the small desk we had bought together at a secondhand shop, his laptop open, his textbooks stacked in precise piles. He didn't turn around. "You can't just tell me you've been pretending I'm dead and then go study for an exam." He let out a heavy sigh, the kind of exhale that framed me as unreasonable and exhausting. "Ava, I already explained this. Everyone at graduation is from a family that matters. Lawyers, judges, CEOs. These are the people who can help my career. If they meet you, they'll question my judgment." "My judgment," I repeated, the words feeling foreign, like a language I'd never learned. What exactly would they question? That you married someone who works hard? Someone who supported you through all of this? He finally swiveled in his chair to face me. His expression was devoid of any warmth, any recognition of the person I had been to him for 7 years. They would question why I married someone who serves coffee for a living, why I chose someone with no degree, no prospects, no connections that could benefit me professionally. Every word was a calculated blow, chosen for maximum impact. This wasn't a spontaneous act of cruelty. This was rehearsed, considered, deliberate. "I helped pay for your degree," I said, hating the way my voice trembled. "I worked doubles so you could afford those books and prep courses. I covered rent when your loans were late. I sacrificed so you could focus." "And I appreciate that," Leo said, in the tone people use when they don't appreciate something at all. But appreciation doesn't change the facts. The legal world is about connections and image. I can't build the career I want if I'm associated with someone whose biggest accomplishment is remembering how people take their coffee. The casual, complete dismissal of my life stung worse than any insult. Hatred at least implies that someone matters enough to be hated. This was colder, a simple calculation that I had served my purpose and was now a liability to be cut loose. "So you told people I died," I said, stating it as a fact, needing to hear it out loud again to make it real. "Yes." He turned back to his laptop, already bored with the conversation. When people asked about my family or personal life, I told them my wife passed away in an accident a few years ago. It was the simplest explanation. Simplest for who? For everyone. He clicked on his screen, his focus already elsewhere. It generated some sympathy, which was helpful. It explained why no one had ever met you, and it avoided awkward questions about why I was married to someone so inappropriate for my social circle. The word inappropriate echoed in my head. 4 years of marriage, 7 years of my life, all reduced to a single adjective that meant I wasn't good enough, had never been good enough, and never would be, no matter what I did or how hard I worked. "When did you start telling people this?" My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Around the middle of second year," he said, as casually as if he were discussing a new study habit. That's when the networking really ramped up, and people started asking more personal questions. Second year. That was 18 months ago. For a year and a half, Leo had been moving through the world as a widower while I was serving coffee and clearing tables to pay our bills. For 18 months, people had been offering him sympathy for a loss that never happened, while I was nursing my aching feet after double shifts so he could study without financial stress. "Does anyone know the truth?" I asked. "Does anyone in your entire law school world know that I actually exist?" He hesitated. and that split-second pause told me everything. A few people from first year met you, briefly, but they transferred or we lost touch. No one who matters knows you're real. No one who matters knows you're real. The sentence was so profoundly absurd that I almost laughed. I was standing right there, breathing, speaking, existing, but in Leo's world, I wasn't real because the people who could advance his career didn't know I existed. "This is insane," I said. "You realize that, right? This isn't normal." "Normal is relative," Leo said, closing his laptop and giving me his full, unnerving attention. "In my world, having the right connections and maintaining the right image is normal, it's essential. You come from a different world where that stuff doesn't matter, but in my profession, it matters more than anything. More than honesty? More than the person who supported you through it all?" "Yes," he said, without a flicker of hesitation or shame. "More than those things. You need to understand something, Ava. I am going to be successful. I am going to build a career that most people only dream of. And I can't do that dragging along someone who represents everything I'm trying to escape." "Everything you're trying to escape," I echoed. "You mean poverty? Working class jobs? The kind of life I live. Yes, exactly." He stood up and he seemed taller than I remembered, or maybe I had just been made to feel small. "I grew up poor, Ava. I know what it's like to be looked down on, dismissed because you don't have the right background. I worked my ass off to get into law school, and I am not going to throw that away by staying tied to a life that will only hold me back. I'm not a life. I'm a person. I'm your wife. Not for much longer." He walked past me to the closet and pulled out a duffel bag. "I think it's better if you stay somewhere else tonight. I need to focus on my exam, and this conversation is not productive." I watched as he started packing my clothes, grabbing things at random and shoving them into the bag. My favorite sweater, the one with the tiny hole in the sleeve I kept meaning to mend. The jeans I wore on our first date. A dress I had bought for a law school formal he'd uninvited me to at the last minute. "Leo, we need to talk about this. You can't just do this." He zipped the bag and held it out to me. "I already have, and I need you to accept it and move on. Don't come to the graduation. Don't contact me at school or at my future job. If anyone ever asks, tell them we were never married. Tell them you have me confused with someone else. Just stay away." "What about the apartment? Our things?" "I'll handle the apartment. Take what you need tonight and I'll have the rest sent wherever you end up." He pulled out his phone and started typing. "I'm texting you my sister's address. You can stay there tonight if you need a place. Your sister knows about this?" "Emily knows we're separating. She doesn't need to know the details." He set the duffel bag at my feet as if dismissing a servant. "I'm going to get back to my books now. Please be gone when I come out." He walked back into the bedroom and I heard the lock click. I stood in the living room, a duffel bag at my feet, looking around the apartment we had shared for 4 years. The secondhand couch where we used to fall asleep, the coffee table where my uneaten casserole now sat, cold and congealed, the kitchen where I'd cooked countless meals, the bathroom where I'd soaked my bleeding feet. None of it was ever really ours. It was his, and I was just borrowing a space in his life until I was no longer useful. I picked up my phone and called my sister Chloe. She answered on the second ring. "Can you come get me?" My voice was surprisingly steady. "I need a place to stay." Chloe didn't ask any questions. She just said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Wait outside." I grabbed the duffel bag and walked out of that apartment without a single look back. The hallway smelled like someone else's dinner, something with garlic and onions. Normal life continuing for people whose worlds weren't falling apart. I waited on the front steps of the building. The night air was cool, and I hadn't thought to grab a jacket. Cars drove by, people walked past with shopping bags and briefcases, heading home to lives that made sense. I sat there feeling hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made me a person, leaving only a shell that looked like Ava, but was filled with nothing but emptiness. When Chloe pulled up in her old sedan, I got into the passenger seat without a word. She took one look at me, at the duffel bag, at my face, which must have told the whole story. "What happened?" she asked gently. "He told people I died," I said, "and then he told me to leave." Chloe reached over and squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything else. She just drove, and I watched the city lights blur into streaks, thinking about how you can be alive and dead at the same time, how you can exist and not exist all at once, depending on who's telling the story. We arrived at Chloe's apartment, and she helped me carry my few belongings inside. Her guest room was small but spotless, with a bed piled high with pillows and curtains that blocked out the city glow. She made me tea I didn't drink and sat with me in silence as I stared at the wall, trying to process how love could curdle into total annihilation. "Do you want to talk about it?" Chloe finally asked. I just shook my head. Talking would require energy I didn't have, explanations for things I couldn't understand myself. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll be in the living room if you need anything. Anything at all." After she left, I lay down on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Across town, Leo was studying for his torts exam, probably feeling relieved to be free of me, already plotting how to maintain his fiction of the tragic widower. And I was here, officially erased but inconveniently still breathing, trying to figure out how to exist in a world where the person who had promised to love me had decided I was better off dead. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later, slid under Chloe's door in a plain manila envelope with no return address. I found them on a Tuesday morning, sitting on the doormat as if they had been patiently waiting for me to wake up and acknowledge their presence. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table and opened it with hands that, to my surprise, were steady. In the 3 weeks I'd spent at Chloe's, my grief had begun to transform, hardening from a fluid, overwhelming sorrow into something sharper, clearer. The documents inside were cold and clinical. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The reason cited, irreconcilable differences. That bloodless legal term reduced 4 years of my life to a checkbox, as if the violence of being erased could be neatly contained in a standardized court filing. I signed them that afternoon with a pen Chloe kept in a junk drawer. My signature looked small and unfamiliar on the dotted line, like it belonged to someone else. I mailed them back the same day. As the postal clerk weighed the envelope, she asked if I wanted tracking. I said no. There was nothing inside worth tracking. Within a week, I'd moved into a small studio apartment above a flower shop on Maple Street. The rent was manageable, and the landlord, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, asked no questions when I explained I needed a place right away. The apartment had floors that slanted slightly and a radiator that made a loud clanking noise at random intervals. But the windows faced east, and every morning the sunrise would paint the walls in shades of orange and pink, making the space feel less like an ending and more like a new beginning. I furnished it piece by piece with finds from thrift stores and curbside alerts. A reading chair with faded floral upholstery but still incredibly comfortable. A small wooden table that wobbled until I tucked a folded piece of cardboard under one leg. Mismatched plates and bowls from the Goodwill bins. I bought several plants for the windowsill and nurtured them with a fierce determination, as if their survival was somehow tied to my own. Each small addition felt like I was reclaiming territory, building something that was mine and mine alone, with no ghosts of a failed partnership lurking in the corners. I went back to work at the Cornerstone Cafe the Monday after I signed the divorce papers. Walking through that door felt both familiar and alien, like returning to a place you'd left as one person and were re-entering as someone entirely new. Sophia was wiping down the counter when I came in for my shift. She looked up, her expression holding no pity, only a solid, quiet understanding. "You back for good?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm back." She nodded once and handed me a clean apron. Table 4 needs coffee, and the couple in the back booth are ready to order. That was it. No prying questions, no gossip, just the familiar routine of work, which demanded my full attention and gave me something concrete to do with my hands and my mind. I tied the apron around my waist, picked up the coffee pot, and for the first time in weeks, I felt steady on my feet. Sophia noticed the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of makeup could hide, but she never pushed for details. She just made sure I ate during my breaks, appearing with a bowl of soup or a plate of toast she claimed was an extra from a canceled order. When I had to duck into the restroom for a moment to collect myself, she covered my tables without a word. Her kindness was practical and unobtrusive, the kind that doesn't ask for gratitude or explanation. Jake was working the weekend shift when I came in on a Saturday, his hands red and raw as he scrubbed pots in the back. He had a way of philosophizing while he worked, sharing profound thoughts in a casual way. "You know what I've realized about dishes?" he said as I was refilling salt shakers. "Every single one starts out a mess, caked on food, grease, stains you think are permanent. But if you just keep working at it, keep scrubbing, eventually they all come clean. Nothing stays ruined forever if you're willing to put in the work." I looked at him, this 20-year-old kid working his way through college, and realized he understood more about resilience than most people twice his age. "That's a good way to look at it," I said. He grinned. "Yeah, well, dishes teach you things. Patience, mostly. And that a fresh start is always possible." Gus, the silent cook, started making my favorite comfort foods without being asked. I'd be in the middle of my section, and he'd slide a plate of grilled cheese and tomato soup across the kitchen counter, catching my eye with a gruff nod that said more than words ever could. Sometimes it was his famous mac and cheese, the kind he only made when he knew someone really needed it. These people saw me. They valued my work and my presence in a way that had nothing to do with who I was married to or what credentials I had. Their world measured worth differently than Leo's. It was based on reliability, kindness, and the small daily acts that kept the diner running. For the first time in years, I felt seen, and that visibility was a healing balm. Chloe checked on me constantly, showing up at my new apartment with bags of groceries and bottles of wine. She never once said, "I told you so," even though she had every right. She'd only met Leo a handful of times, and after each one, she'd made cautious remarks. "He looks at people at parties like he's window shopping," she had once said, always scanning for someone more useful or more interesting. I had defended him then, making excuses about law school culture. But she had been right. She was the one who'd noticed how his social media had slowly erased me. Now she just showed up with takeout from my favorite Indian place, and we'd sit at my wobbly table, eating curry and watching terrible reality TV, her sarcastic commentary on the manufactured drama making me laugh until I cried. Those moments were a lifeline, a reminder that not all bonds shatter. I created new routines that were entirely my own. Saturday mornings, I'd walk to the farmer's market buying fresh vegetables that I'd cook in my tiny kitchen. Sunday evenings were spent in the bookstore on the ground floor of my building, where the owner let me browse for hours. I read novels about other people's problems and memoirs about survival, and slowly I started to believe that my life wasn't over, just different. The weeks turned into months. Summer bled into fall, and the leaves outside my window turned from green to gold. I worked my shifts, came home to my little apartment, and built a life that was modest but authentically mine. I wasn't exactly happy, but I was stable, and after months of freefall, stability felt like a monumental achievement. Then came the morning that changed everything all over again. It was a Tuesday, about 8 months after the divorce was finalized. I was working the breakfast rush, moving through the tables with a coffee pot, lost in the familiar rhythm of my work. 2 law students were in the corner booth, the same one where Leo used to sit. They were deep in conversation about an upcoming wedding, and I was only half listening as I approached to offer a refill. "Did you get an invite to Leo Vance's wedding?" one of them asked. My hand froze mid-pour, coffee splashing over the rim of the mug. I quickly set the pot down and pretended to wipe up the small spill, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Yeah, man, it looks like it's going to be massive," the other student replied. "His fiance's family is loaded. Her dad is Judge Beaumont, right? Isabel Beaumont. Can you imagine landing someone like that?" Leo really upgraded from that whole tragic backstory he had going on. The dead wife thing. They chuckled, and the sound cut through me like a shard of glass. I finished wiping the table and walked back to the kitchen on legs that felt disconnected from my body. Isabel Beaumont, daughter of an appellate judge. The exact kind of pedigree Leo had been seeking, the polar opposite of a working-class waitress who embarrassed him. He hadn't just left me, he had upgraded, trading authenticity for advantage, swapping the woman who had funded his education for one whose connections could supercharge his career. And he was getting married, celebrating this new union while still telling people his first wife had died tragically. I finished my shift on autopilot, clearing tables and pouring coffee while my mind spun. When I finally walked home, I took the long way through the park. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, the scent of approaching winter. Back in my apartment, I sat at my wobbly table and stared at my laptop for a long time. I hadn't looked Leo up since the divorce. I had been focused on moving forward, on building, not obsessing. But now, I had to see. I had to know what story he was telling, what version of reality he had built on top of my erasure. I opened the laptop and typed his name into the search bar, and what I found made something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. It wasn't jealousy. It was a darker, more focused clarity, and it felt almost like purpose. Leo's Instagram profile loaded, the images appearing one by one like pieces of evidence. The first photo showed him at a black-tie charity event, wearing a perfectly tailored suit I knew he couldn't have afforded when we were together. Isabel Beaumont was on his arm, her hand resting elegantly on his, both of them smiling with the unshakable confidence of people who had never had to count coins for groceries. I scrolled down. More photos appeared, each meticulously composed. Leo at a legal conference, his name tag identifying him as an associate at Sterling Finch, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. Leo and Isabel at a vineyard, raising wine glasses against a picturesque sunset. Leo alone in a polished new office, law books artfully arranged behind him, his expression one of thoughtful accomplishment. But it was the captions that made my hands start to tremble. Under a photo from the charity gala, he had written about his gratitude for second chances. The comments were filled with heart emojis and messages of support. People wrote about his strength, his resilience. One person commented on how inspiring it was to see him find happiness again after such a devastating loss. I clicked on an older post from about 6 months ago. It was a photo of Leo standing alone on a beach, his back to the camera. The caption read, "3 years ago today, I lost my best friend and my partner. The grief never truly leaves, but I've learned that carrying their love forward is the greatest tribute. She would have wanted me to keep building the life we dreamed of together." Over 100 comments. People shared their own stories of loss. They praised his vulnerability, his emotional maturity. A comment from a woman whose profile identified her as a senior partner at his firm said his resilience in the face of personal tragedy was one of the things that made him such a valuable member of their team. A cold, hard knot formed in my chest. This wasn't just a convenient lie told to a few people. He had built an entire public mythology around my fictional death, complete with anniversary posts and philosophical musings on grief. My erasure had become his performance art, and he was getting a standing ovation for it. I opened a new tab and searched for his name and the law school. The third result was an Alumni magazine article published 4 months ago. The headline read, "Rising Star, How Personal Tragedy Shaped One Graduate's Pursuit of Justice." My finger hovered over the link before I clicked. The article opened with a photo of Leo in his office. It described his remarkable journey, balancing academic excellence with the emotional weight of losing his spouse during his first year. I read the interview, my pulse quickening. Leo described our marriage as a beautiful but brief chapter, a partnership cut short by a tragic accident he preferred not to detail, out of respect for her memory. He talked about how the loss had taught him about the fragility of life and motivated him to pursue civil rights law. None of it was true. He had always talked about making money, not changing the world. The interviewer had swallowed it whole, weaving a compelling narrative of a man who had transformed pain into purpose. A professor was quoted saying, "Leo's ability to channel personal tragedy into professional drive was what the legal system needed." A partner at his firm mentioned being impressed not just by his credentials, but by his character, which had been tested and proven through unimaginable loss. I went back to Instagram and found the engagement announcement. It had been posted 2 months ago. A photo of them on a yacht, Isabel's hand prominently displaying a diamond ring that cost more than I made in a year. The caption was about finding love again, honoring the past while embracing the future. Her parents had commented with heart emojis. His colleagues had written messages of support, and threaded through it all was the story of the tragic widower who had suffered, healed, and now finally deserved his happiness. I clicked on Isabel's profile. It was equally curated. Charity events, gallery openings, weekend trips to a world I'd only seen in magazines. She was beautiful, polished, and utterly confident. Her bio mentioned her work at a nonprofit and her passion for justice reform. There were several posts about Leo, each one glowing with admiration. In one, she wrote about how his strength in the face of tragedy had inspired her. In another, she mentioned how honored she felt to be chosen by someone who understood the preciousness of love because he had lost it once before. She had no idea. Isabel Beaumont, daughter of a judge, a woman dedicated to justice, had no idea she was engaged to a man who had casually erased his living wife from existence because she embarrassed him. She thought she was getting a grieving widower who had turned pain into purpose. She had no idea she was getting the man who had told me I was better off dead. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my small apartment. The radiator clanked its familiar rhythm. My hands had stopped shaking. A strange, detached calm had settled over me. Leo hadn't just told a lie. He had built his entire career on the foundation of my fictional death. Every connection he'd made, every opportunity he'd gotten, all of it was built on this massive deception. The unfairness was staggering. I had given him 7 years of my life. I had worked until I bled, and he had repaid me by killing me off and using my ghost as a stepping stone. But what struck me most wasn't just what he'd done to me. It was what he was doing to everyone else. Isabel, his colleagues, his clients, they were all being deceived. I stood up and walked to the window. A couple walked by holding hands. A teenager sat at the bus stop scrolling through her phone. Normal life. And I was standing here, holding a truth that could detonate his carefully constructed world. Some lies are too big to let stand. Some betrayals demand a response, not for revenge, but because silence is a form of complicity. I thought of Isabel walking down the aisle toward a man she didn't know. I thought of his colleagues and clients trusting a man built on fiction. This wasn't about making Leo suffer, though the thought held a certain appeal. This was about resurrecting the truth. This was about giving everyone in Leo's fabricated world a chance to see who he really was. I opened my laptop again and created a new anonymous email account. Then I started to research wedding venues, guest lists, contact information. I worked methodically, filling a notebook with a careful architecture of truth, ready to be deployed at exactly the right moment. By the time I finished, it was nearly dawn. My coffee was long cold. But I had a plan, and for the first time since Leo told me I couldn't come to his graduation, I felt something other than grief or hollow determination. I felt a purpose, as clear and cold and certain as ice, forming on a winter lake. The notebook sat open on my table the next morning, filled with names, numbers, and the intricate details I had gathered. I was building something precise, a structure of truth that would stand on its own, without me needing to be visibly present. Isabel's social media had helpfully provided the wedding venue, Beaumont Estate, an upscale property 30 miles outside the city with manicured gardens and crystal chandeliers. She had tagged the location, the date, and hashtagged it with words like blessed and forever. I spent the next day cross-referencing social media and law firm directories, mapping the network of people who believed Leo's fiction. Judge Richard Beaumont and his wife, Catherine, were easy to find. The senior partners at Sterling Finch were all connected to Leo online, their congratulatory comments littering his engagement announcement. By Wednesday, I had a spreadsheet of 30 key people: Isabel's family, Leo's partners, even his future mother-in-law's personal assistant. Each name was a contact point, a place where a seed of truth could be planted. I made my first call on Thursday morning. My hands were steady as I dialed the number for the Beaumont estate. When the wedding coordinator answered with professional cheer, my voice was calm and pleasant. "Hi, this is Ava Vance. I'm calling to follow up on some billing details for the Vance-Beaumont wedding this Saturday." A brief pause. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that name?" "Ava Vance, Leo's wife. I just wanted to confirm the payment arrangements are all finalized." The pause stretched longer. I could hear papers shuffling. "I'm showing the primary contacts as Leo Vance and Isabel Beaumont. Are you at the wedding party?" "I'm his wife," I said again, letting the words hang in the air. "Is there a problem with the account?" No problem. I just need to verify." "Can you hold for one moment?" I held for 3 long minutes, listening to elevator music. When she returned, her voice was carefully neutral. "I'll need to contact the primary account holder to clarify the contact list. Is there a number where you can be reached?" I gave her my number and hung up. The seed was planted. She would call Leo or Isabel, asking about the wife who had called about billing. An impossible question if his story were true. My second call, on Friday morning, was to Sterling Finch. I asked to speak with Leo Vance regarding an update to his spousal insurance benefits. Of course. "May I ask who is calling?" "Ava Vance, his wife." Another pause, shorter but weighted. "Let me transfer you." The call went to voicemail. I left a brief, pleasant message asking him to call me back about paperwork that needed his signature. Then I called back and asked the receptionist to leave him a physical note as well. "I'll make sure he gets it," she said. "Just to confirm, you said you're his wife?" "Yes, that's correct. Ava Vance." I could hear her typing. That note would sit on his desk, a ticking time bomb of confusion for anyone who saw it. My third call was to Isabel's family office. "Hi, this is Ava Vance. I'm calling about the seating arrangements for the wedding. I just wanted to confirm where Leo's wife should be seated." The silence on the other end was profound. "I'm sorry," the assistant said, her voice strained. "I'm not seeing your name on the guest list, and our information shows Mr. Vance as unmarried. Are you sure you have the correct wedding? Leo Vance and Isabel Beaumont this Saturday at the Beaumont estate. That's the one. Let me get your contact information and I'll have someone from the family reach out to you." I gave her my number and email. 3 calls, 3 sources of confusion, all converging on Leo's world in the 72 hours before his wedding. Each one would generate a conversation. The confusion would spread like ripples, reaching him from multiple directions. I knew Leo. He needed to control his image meticulously. These small, unexplainable disruptions would create an anxiety he couldn't manage, because addressing them required either compounding the lie or admitting the devastating truth. Saturday morning was cool and clear. I dressed in the navy blue dress I'd once bought for his graduation. I drove to the Beaumont estate and parked across the street in a small public lot with a clear view of the entrance. I settled in with a book and a bottle of water, and I waited. Guests began arriving around 11:30 in expensive cars, dressed in elegant attire. I saw the Beaumonts arrive, then Leo's law partners. At noon, Isabel arrived in a white limousine, a vision in her wedding gown. 15 minutes later, Leo appeared. He looked successful, confident, shaking hands and laughing with his groomsmen. He was every inch the man he had wanted to become. I checked my phone, then turned it off. The ceremony was scheduled for 1 o'clock. The calls I had made were about to bear fruit. At 12:45, as guests were taking their seats and the string quartet began to play, Leo took his place at the altar. Then, his phone rang. I saw him stiffen, pull it out, and decline the call with an irritated frown. 30 seconds later, it rang again. This time, his jaw tightened. He declined it again, but his composure was cracking. The third time it rang, he answered, stepping away from the officiant. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read his body language, hunched shoulders, sharp, agitated gestures. The carefully constructed calm was gone. Guests in the front rows started whispering. Then Catherine Beaumont, Isabel's mother, stood up, her own phone pressed to her ear. Her face was a mask of confusion turning to suspicion. She marched toward Leo, her voice sharp and demanding. Other guests were checking their phones now. The wedding coordinator ran across the lawn, tablet in hand. One of Leo's senior partners, a man I recognized from LinkedIn, strode to the front, phone out, showing Leo something on the screen. Leo's face had gone from irritated to panicked. The string quartet fell silent. And then Isabel emerged from the manor. She was supposed to wait for her cue, but she must have sensed something was wrong. She walked toward the altar, her expression shifting from bridal joy to confusion, then to something harder as she got closer. She grabbed Leo's arm, pulling him aside. They stood face to face, their conversation intense. I saw Isabel step back, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Her father, Judge Beaumont, stood and approached them with the grave authority of a man who commands courtrooms. He said something brief to Leo, and I watched the color drain from Leo's face. The ceremony was dissolving. The judge addressed the guests, and though I couldn't hear the words, I saw the reaction. Confusion, whispers, people starting to leave. Isabel's bridesmaids surrounded her, and she turned her back on Leo, walking back toward the manor. Leo tried to follow, but Judge Beaumont stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. The two men stood there as the wedding fell apart around them. I had seen enough. The truth had done its work. Leo would have to choose now, admit the lie or build an even bigger one. Either way, his world was irrevocably cracked. I started my car and pulled away. In my rearview mirror, the scene of chaos faded. My phone remained off. I didn't need to hear his excuses. I had done what I came to do. I had simply stopped being dead. The revenge I needed wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was just this: the truth, deployed with precision, allowed to spread like cracks in ice. The waitress he'd dismissed had served him one final thing he couldn't ignore. I was alive, inconvenient, unmarketable, and completely real, and that, I realized, was enough. I drove home through the autumn afternoon, a quiet sense of completion settling over me. I unlocked the door to my studio apartment, my sanctuary, and made tea. The world outside continued on, indifferent to the earthquake I had triggered in Leo's life. My phone stayed off for the rest of the weekend. I didn't need to know the details. The truth, once released, has its own momentum. On Sunday, I worked my regular shift. Sophia studied my face. "You look different," she said. "Something happened?" "I took care of something," I replied, and that was all. On Monday, I finally turned my phone on. 17 missed calls from Leo, a dozen texts, progressing from anger to pleading. I deleted them all and blocked his number. On Tuesday, Chloe called. "So, I heard some gossip," she said, "about a wedding that went sideways. The judge looked ready to call the whole thing off." "Sounds complicated," I said neutrally. "The ceremony eventually happened," she continued, "but the reception was a disaster. And now, people are talking. The story about him faking a spouse's death for sympathy is spreading like wildfire. I appreciate you letting me know," I said, "but what happens in his world isn't my concern anymore." "Fair enough," she said. "I just thought you'd want to know." It worked. After we hung up, I finished my break. The information settled without emotion. Leo's world was cracking, just as I knew it would. What happened next was between him and the people he'd deceived. The weeks that followed fell into a familiar, peaceful rhythm. Then, in February, the owner of the diner called me into his office and offered me a promotion to assistant manager. It came with better pay, regular hours, and for the first time in years, weekends off. "You've earned this," he said. "You show up, you work hard, you treat people right. That matters more than any fancy degree." Sophia organized a small celebration in the break room with cake. Jake made a card signed by everyone. These people, my real family, saw me and valued me. This promotion, built on reality, felt more meaningful than any of Leo's polished achievements. 6 months after the wedding, Chloe shared another update. "Isabel's parents hired an investigator," she said over coffee. "They found out the whole truth. The marriage went forward to avoid public humiliation, but everyone knows it's a sham. He's also been sidelined at work. The sympathetic widower narrative is gone, replaced by questions about his integrity." "Does that feel satisfying?" Chloe asked. "It feels complete," I said. "I did it to stop being dead. What happens to him now is his own story." The anniversary of my courthouse wedding to Leo came and went. I took myself to a fancy restaurant I'd never been able to afford. I sat alone at a table by the window, sipping expensive wine, savoring a meal I had earned. There was no one across from me to make me feel small or ashamed, just me, present in my own life without apology. In that quiet moment, I understood. Being erased from someone's story doesn't mean you cease to exist. It means you are free to write your own. I had refused to cooperate with my erasure. The waitress he dismissed had served him one final order he couldn't send back: the truth. As I walked home, I caught my reflection in a darkened window. The woman looking back wasn't broken. She wasn't a ghost. She was Ava, assistant manager, survivor. She had scars, but she also had a profound sense of her own worth, earned through honest work and valued by good people. My story wasn't glamorous, it wouldn't be told at charity galas, but it was mine. It was real. I raised my teacup in a silent toast to the woman I had become. Not the ghost Leo tried to create, but someone solid, whole, and inconveniently, completely alive. This story of truth serving justice had you hooked from start to finish. Hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Leo's phone started ringing at the altar and his perfect facade began crumbling in real time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more compelling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. End of story.